Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Do you still remember a time when cigarette smoke was part of Hollywood's charm? When every film poster carried not just beauty, but danger? Behind the silver screens and glittering lights, many stars were unknowingly writing their own final act with every puff. In today's video, we will look back at 13 legends who lost their lives to lung cancer. From the king of cool, Steve McQueen, to the last Beatle of peace, George Harrison, each story reveals how fame, addiction, and fate intertwined in the most tragic ways. Do you remember them? Did you ever see their final movies or hear their last words? Leave a comment sharing your memory, because these are not just deaths, they're warnings written in smoke. Number 1. Yul Brynner. When Yul Brynner died on a quiet October morning in New York, the world lost more than a movie star. It lost a man who spent his final breath trying to undo the habit that killed him. Just months before his passing, Brynner had recorded a haunting message for the American Cancer Society, pleading, "Now that I'm gone, don't smoke. Whatever you do, just don't smoke." It was broadcast only after his death, and it struck like thunder across the world. Brynner had lived larger than life, an exotic, bald-headed king on stage and screen, immortalized in The King and I and The Magnificent Seven. For decades, he carried a cigarette in every photo, every interview, the symbol of cool sophistication. Yet behind that elegance, his lungs were quietly failing. Diagnosed with cancer in 1983, he faced the disease with a performer's discipline, continuing to appear on Broadway even as chemotherapy drained his strength. In his final year, he turned his pain into a cause. Reporters recalled how he wept after recording his posthumous message, knowing it would only air when he was gone. "Let my death mean something," he said softly. When the video finally aired in 1985, millions of viewers watched, frozen, as the once invincible King of Siam warned them from beyond the grave. Dear viewers, do you remember that chilling message? How did it make you feel to see a legend face death so bravely, only to warn us too late? Share your thoughts below, because Brynner's last act wasn't on stage. It was a desperate attempt to save others from his fate. And as one star faded into the smoke, another Beatle would soon follow. His music filled with love, his final fight against the same silent killer. Number 2. George Harrison, the Beatle who fought cancer with love and peace. When George Harrison took his final breath on November 29, 2001, a soft chant of mantras echoed through the room. The quiet Beatle, the man who had preached love and peace to the world, was gone, claimed by lung cancer that had spread to his brain. The air was filled with incense and the hum of devotion, a scene that felt less like death and more like transcendence. Harrison had spent most of his life surrounded by music and, unfortunately, by cigarette smoke. Even at the height of Beatlemania, he was rarely seen without one. Decades of heavy smoking caught up with him in 1997, when doctors discovered a malignant growth in his lung. He underwent treatment, but the cancer returned, spreading relentlessly. Still, he refused to live in fear. "All things must pass," he often reminded his friends, a line that became both his philosophy and prophecy. When news of his death broke, fans worldwide gathered to light candles and sing his songs under the winter sky. Paul McCartney called him "my little brother," and Ringo Starr wept, saying he had visited George just weeks before. The world grieved not only a musician, but a spirit of serenity, the one Beatle who had sought enlightenment rather than spotlight. His final words to his wife, Olivia, were a whisper of gratitude and acceptance. Even facing death, he radiated calm, as if ready to merge with the music of the universe he'd always believed in. Do you remember that moment, ladies and gentlemen, when George's voice faded, but his songs lived on? Leave a comment below if you've ever found comfort in his music during dark times. And while George met his end with peace, another man, the face of American news, would confront his fate on live television, announcing his own death sentence to millions. Number 3. Peter Jennings. In April 2005, millions of Americans sat before their televisions and saw the face of a man they had trusted for decades, Peter Jennings, the calm and steady anchor of ABC World News Tonight. But that night, his voice trembled. "I have learned that I am afflicted with lung cancer," he said softly. "Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I smoked for a long time, and though I quit once, I started again after September 11th. The honesty in his tone stunned viewers. He had just delivered the most painful news of his career, about himself. Jennings had been a household name, known for his grace under pressure, the man who narrated America's triumphs and tragedies. Yet behind the studio lights, the old habit had returned. Decades of smoking finally took their toll. Doctors diagnosed him with advanced lung cancer, and the journalist who had covered wars and elections began his own personal battle. For 4 months, audiences prayed for his recovery. Colleagues left his empty chair in the newsroom untouched. But the disease moved fast. On August 7, 2005, Peter Jennings passed away at his Manhattan apartment, surrounded by his family. His network aired a silent minute of remembrance. The newsroom where his voice had once guided millions, now filled only with stillness. Viewers sent thousands of letters, many admitting that his confession had pushed them to quit smoking. Even in death, Jennings was still informing, still guiding, this time not about the world's tragedies, but his own. Dear viewers, do you remember that fragile announcement? The way his eyes, once filled with authority, flickered with fear for the first time? Tell us how it felt to watch a man who always delivered the news become the news himself. And as America mourned its trusted voice, across the border in Mexico, another legend, the King of Cool, was making one last, desperate attempt to outrun his fate. 4. Steve McQueen. On November 7, 1980, the world's ultimate symbol of masculinity, Steve McQueen, died alone in a small clinic in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. He had gone there seeking a miracle, chasing one last chance to live. The man who had conquered Hollywood as the King of Cool was now frail, his once fiery blue eyes dulled by pain. Mesothelioma, a rare, brutal cancer of the lungs linked to asbestos, had spread beyond hope. McQueen had lived life at full throttle. From Bullet to The Great Escape, his characters were fearless, untouchable, always in control. Off-screen, he was the same, racing cars, riding motorcycles, and working on sets filled with asbestos-laden materials. He also smoked heavily, a habit he once called part of my edge. But no edge could cut through this disease. When American doctors refused further surgery, McQueen crossed the border, turning to unconventional treatments involving coffee enemas and animal cell injections. The tabloids followed every step of his desperate journey. They printed photos of the action hero, now gaunt and ghost-like, clinging to life. On that November morning, just hours after surgeons removed a massive tumor from his abdomen, McQueen's heart stopped. He was only 50. Hollywood was stunned. The rebel who never played by the rules had tried to cheat death itself and lost. His widow, Barbara Minty, later said he faced the end without fear. He didn't want pity, she recalled. He wanted to go out like a fighter. Ladies and gentlemen, do you remember that image? The legend who outran everything except time? What would you have done in his place, knowing the odds were already written? Leave a comment sharing your thoughts. And as the dust of McQueen's final ride settled, another story emerged. A woman who never smoked, who lived for love, and yet lost her breath to the same merciless disease. 5. Dana Reeve. When Dana Reeve passed away in March 2006, the world was in disbelief. How could the widow of Superman, a woman who never smoked a single cigarette, be taken by lung cancer? Only 17 months earlier, she had buried her husband, Christopher Reeve, the man who had embodied courage after his paralyzing accident. Together, they had become symbols of hope, and now fate had struck again. Dana's story was as graceful as it was tragic. A classically trained singer and actress, she met Christopher in the late 1980s and quickly became his anchor through unimaginable pain. After his accident, she became his voice, his strength, the woman who kept the Superman legacy alive. But just as the world began to heal from his death, she received her own diagnosis: advanced stage lung cancer. Doctors were stunned. She had never smoked, never lived with smokers, yet the disease ravaged her body with ruthless speed. Through it all, Dana smiled. Even while undergoing treatment, she continued her advocacy work, appearing at charity events with quiet dignity. When her health declined rapidly in early 2006, she withdrew from the public eye. On March 6th, she took her last breath in New York, surrounded by her family. She was only 44. The news broke hearts across the globe. People couldn't comprehend how someone so full of light could be extinguished so quickly. The Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation received thousands of letters, not just of condolence, but of gratitude for her unshakable grace. Ladies and gentlemen, what do you think took her away? Fate, genetics, or some cruel irony of life? Leave a comment below, because Dana's story reminds us that tragedy doesn't always come from our choices. Sometimes it simply finds us. And as the world mourned the woman who carried Superman's torch, another hero of the silver screen, the toughest cowboy of them all, was fighting his own invisible enemy in silence. 6. John Wayne. In June 1979, the Duke, Hollywood's ultimate cowboy, rode off into the sunset for the final time. John Wayne, the towering figure who had faced bandits, outlaws, and entire armies on screen, finally lost his battle against cancer. It was not a bullet, not an ambush, but his own body that betrayed him. For years, he had been the face of American strength, yet behind that image, his lungs had been quietly consumed by disease. Wayne's ordeal began back in 1964, when doctors discovered a massive tumor in his left lung. The cause seemed obvious. He smoked 6 packs of unfiltered cigarettes a day. But another shadow loomed over his story. The film The Conqueror, shot in the Nevada desert near a U.S. nuclear test site. Nearly half of the cast and crew would later develop cancer. Wayne's friends called it the curse of the desert. After a grueling surgery that removed an entire lung and several ribs, he beat the odds once, walking out of the hospital smiling, waving to fans. For 15 years, he lived as a symbol of survival, never letting weakness show. Yet in his 70s, cancer returned, this time in his stomach, spreading too fast to fight. Surrounded by his family, Wayne faced death with the same stoic courage that had made him a legend. His final words were simple: "Of course, I know who you are. You're my girl. I love you." The world mourned him as a national hero. Flags were lowered, and even the U.S. Congress honored his legacy. Still, for many, his story stood as a warning about the dangers of cigarettes and radiation, the unseen villains of Hollywood's golden age. Ladies and gentlemen, do you remember watching his final interviews when the Duke looked smaller, yet somehow more human than ever? Share your memory in the comments. And while the cowboy's hat was laid to rest, another queen of glamour, the woman who defined World War II beauty, was nearing her own tragic curtain call. 7. Betty Grable. When Betty Grable died in July 1973, it felt as though an era of gold and glamour had vanished overnight. She had once been America's sweetheart, the pinup girl whose famous legs were insured for $1 million and whose smile had carried soldiers through the darkest nights of World War II. Yet behind that dazzling image, the glow had long been dimmed by cigarette smoke and exhaustion. Grable had lived for the spotlight since she was a teenager, dancing and singing her way to fame in the 1940s. Her movies, like Down Argentine Way and How to Marry a Millionaire, turned her into one of Hollywood's highest-paid stars. But the constant pressure to stay young, thin, and radiant came with a heavy price. Cigarettes became her silent companion, on set, in dressing rooms, even during rehearsals. "They keep me calm," she once joked, unaware of the damage building inside her lungs. By the early 1970s, her health began to fail. Coughs that wouldn't fade, nights of breathlessness, she ignored them, believing the show must go on. When doctors finally diagnosed lung cancer, it was already too late. Grable spent her final months quietly at home in Santa Monica, surrounded by family and a few loyal friends. She passed away at just 56. The news broke hearts across America. For many veterans, it was as though a piece of their youth had died. Old wartime posters showing her radiant smile suddenly felt haunting. The woman who had once symbolized vitality had been undone by her own vices. Dear viewers, do you remember her photograph? That perfect pose in the white swimsuit looking back over her shoulder? How strange it is that such an image of life came from someone dying inside. Tell us your thoughts in the comments. And as the posters of Betty Grable faded from walls, another Hollywood hero, known for his strength and steady aim on screen, would face the same disease with unflinching resolve. 8. Chuck Connors. On a cold November morning in 1992, Chuck Connors, the towering star of The Rifleman, took his final breath at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. For decades, he had been the embodiment of rugged masculinity, a cowboy with a rifle in hand, justice in his eyes, and a cigarette often tucked between his fingers. In the end, that cigarette proved to be his deadliest co-star. Connors' life read like an American legend. Before Hollywood, he had been one of the few athletes to play in both Major League Baseball and the NBA. But it was acting that made him immortal. His portrayal of Lucas McCain in The Rifleman defined the ideal of a strong moral father figure in a violent world. Off-screen, however, Connors lived a different kind of intensity. Endless filming, heavy smoking, and long nights filled with the smell of tobacco and bourbon. By the early 1990s, years of cigarette use had caught up with him. Diagnosed with advanced lung cancer, Connors kept his condition private, continuing to meet fans and attend conventions. Those who saw him near the end were shocked. The once broad-chested cowboy was frail, coughing between words. When the disease finally took him at age 71, his death was met with a quiet sorrow that spread through every small-town living room that had once tuned in to his show. After his passing, his son Mike said softly, "Dad's strength was real. He just never let the world see his pain." That truth resonated with fans who realized that even heroes could fall to something as simple, as deadly as smoke. Ladies and gentlemen, do you remember the way Chuck's rifle cracked through your television speakers every night? Did you ever imagine that same hand would one day tremble from illness? Leave your thoughts below. And while the cowboy's rifle fell silent, another man, a Starfleet engineer who once commanded the universe, was losing his own battle against the very air he breathed. 9. James Doohan. On July 20th, 2005, the man who kept the Starship Enterprise running finally ran out of breath. James Doohan, beloved by generations as Scotty from Star Trek, died at his home in Redmond, Washington, after years of battling lung disease and pneumonia. For a man who had once beamed millions of fans into the future, it was a painfully human ending. Doohan had lived an extraordinary life even before Hollywood. A decorated World War II veteran, he stormed the beaches of Normandy and was shot 6 times by enemy fire, surviving only because one bullet was stopped by a silver cigarette case in his breast pocket. Ironically, the same habit that saved his life that night would one day end it. Doohan was a lifelong smoker, often lighting one after another during breaks on set, his thick Scottish accent rolling through the smoke as he delivered his lines. In the early 2000s, his health began to decline. Doctors diagnosed him with pulmonary fibrosis, worsened by decades of cigarette use. Fans were heartbroken when news spread that their favorite engineer could no longer attend conventions. When he passed away at age 85, tributes poured in from across the galaxy. NASA, fellow Star Trek cast members, and millions of devoted fans. His ashes were later sent into space, fulfilling his lifelong dream of exploring the final frontier. Doohan's death struck a bittersweet chord. The man who spent his career fixing broken starships couldn't repair the damage in his own body. Yet, even in death, he reminded us of something profoundly human, that courage and laughter can outshine pain. Ladies and gentlemen, do you remember Scotty's famous line, "I'm giving her all she's got, Captain"? Perhaps that was what he did until the very end, gave life everything he had. Tell us your thoughts below. And as the stars mourned their engineer, another face of innocence, the cheerful father from Disney's golden age, was quietly slipping away from the same merciless disease. 10. Dean Jones. When Dean Jones passed away in September 2015, the news spread quietly, almost too softly for a man who had once brought joy to millions. He was 74. Gone from complications of lung cancer, and Hollywood barely had time to say goodbye. For those who grew up in the warmth of Disney's golden era, his death felt like losing a piece of childhood itself. Jones was the face of clean, wholesome entertainment, the loving father, the quick-witted hero, the man who could make a talking Volkswagen feel alive in The Love Bug and That Darn Cat. On screen, he was unshakably cheerful, the very image of health and virtue. Yet behind that grin, he carried a lifelong battle, not just with cigarettes, but with depression and faith. In interviews, he confessed that fame had once left him hollow. It wasn't until he found religion that he said, "I finally understood what peace meant." When doctors diagnosed him with lung cancer, Jones faced it with quiet strength, never seeking pity. He continued attending charity events, signing autographs, smiling for photos, all while his body weakened. Those close to him said he never once complained. His final days were spent surrounded by his family and music, the same kind of melodies that had made him a household name. Fans around the world mourned with gentle nostalgia, remembering the man who had embodied decency in an industry often defined by scandal. His passing was not loud, but it was deeply felt. Dear viewers, do you recall that boyish grin, the warmth that filled the screen whenever he appeared? Did you ever imagine such light could hide so much pain? Share your memories in the comments. And as Hollywood said farewell to its kindest leading man, another star, the one who truly went out in flames, would leave behind a tragedy both literal and symbolic. 11. Jack Cassidy. In the early hours of December 12, 1976, firefighters rushed to a burning apartment in West Hollywood. Inside, they found the charred remains of a man later identified as Jack Cassidy, Broadway heartthrob, television star, and father of teen idol David Cassidy. He had fallen asleep on his couch with a lit cigarette in hand. The fire that followed was so intense it melted the silver frames on his walls. For a performer whose charm once lit up stages across America, it was an unbearably ironic end, consumed by the very flame he held. Cassidy's life had been a whirlwind of applause and chaos. On Broadway, he was magnetic, earning a Tony Award for She Loves Me. On television, he became a fixture in shows like Columbo and The Partridge Family. But behind that charismatic smile lay a storm of vanity, ambition, and self-destruction. He struggled with bipolar disorder and alcoholism, and cigarettes were his constant companion, smoldering on every piano and dressing table he touched. That fateful night, he had been drinking heavily, alone. Neighbors later recalled hearing music playing softly before the fire broke out. By the time help arrived, the smoke had already filled the apartment, sealing his fate. He was 49 years old. His son David would later say, "My father burned so bright he had to burn out." Those words captured both the brilliance and tragedy of Jack Cassidy, a man whose passion was as consuming as the flames that took him. Ladies and gentlemen, can you imagine that moment? The star who lived for applause, silenced by the same smoke that once framed his stage entrances? What lesson do you take from a man who burned from both sides of the candle? Leave your thoughts below. And as Hollywood mourned the man who vanished in fire, another legend, Dumbledore himself, would soon face his own battle against the darkness that medicine could not defeat. 12. Richard Harris. When Richard Harris died on October 25, 2002, the news rippled across the world with the kind of sorrow reserved for royalty. To a new generation, he was the wise and kind Professor Dumbledore from Harry Potter. To an older one, he was the fiery Irish actor whose voice could shake a theater and whose temper could start a war. But few knew that behind the grand performances, Harris had been quietly battling cancer, a lymphoma that had spread to his lungs. He was admitted to University College Hospital in London just months after finishing The Chamber of Secrets. Reporters swarmed the entrance, desperate for updates. True to form, Harris met them with wit. When a nurse told a visitor that he was too ill to see anyone, he shouted from his bed, "Tell her I'm not dead yet." Even in the face of death, he refused to lose his humor. Harris had lived a wild life, filled with whiskey, poetry, and rebellion. He smoked heavily, drank excessively, and partied with kings and rock stars. Yet he was also deeply sensitive, capable of profound performances in Camelot, A Man Called Horse, and The Field. His body may have grown frail, but his spirit burned until the end. On that final day, as the autumn light dimmed over London, his sons, Jared and Jamie, sat by his side. He whispered one last mischievous line to them. It was the food, not the magic, that killed Dumbledore. Hours later, he was gone. His death was felt everywhere. J.K. Rowling called him a lion of an actor. The cast of Harry Potter wept openly. To millions, he was Dumbledore forever, the magician who could make the audience believe in wonder, even as his own body failed. Ladies and gentlemen, do you remember the first time you saw his Dumbledore on screen? Wise, gentle, immortal? Did you know the man behind the beard was dying as he spoke those lines? Share your memories in the comments. And as Richard Harris took his final bow, one last name remained. A woman who defied death itself and turned her suffering into hope for others. 13. Anne Gillian. Unlike the others on this list, Anne Gillian did not die. She lived to tell the tale. But her story belongs here because she walked through the same valley of death and emerged with a message of survival. In the late 1980s, the actress and singer who had once charmed audiences in It's a Living and Gypsy received a diagnosis that sounded like a death sentence: breast cancer, later spreading toward her lungs. Doctors prepared her for the worst. Anne, however, refused to surrender. At just 35, she underwent a double mastectomy, enduring brutal rounds of treatment that left her weak but unbroken. Hollywood watched in silence, expecting her to fade away like so many before her. Instead, she returned to the screen, thinner, fragile, yet radiant in courage. Her made-for-TV film, The Anne Gillian Story, where she portrayed herself battling cancer, earned her an Emmy nomination and turned her into a living symbol of hope for millions. Over time, her illness went into remission, but its shadow never fully disappeared. Anne used her fame to speak for others still trapped in hospital rooms, lending her voice to cancer research and survivors' causes. She became proof that the disease that had taken so many Hollywood legends could sometimes be defeated, with faith, resilience, and love. Her story became the light at the end of a tunnel filled with tragedy. While Yul Brynner, George Harrison, and others warned the world with their final breaths, Anne Gillian showed what it meant to keep breathing, to live beyond the pain. Ladies and gentlemen, do you think survival changes fame? Does overcoming death make a person more alive than before? Tell us in the comments. And now, as we close this chapter on 13 lives touched by the same invisible killer, one truth remains. Fame cannot shield the lungs from smoke, nor the heart from fate. Ladies and gentlemen, every story you've heard today carries the same haunting echo, the hiss of a cigarette, the whisper of breath slipping away. These 13 stars once ruled the world with music, laughter, and light. Yet in the end, all the applause, all the fame could not silence the slow, invisible killer that crept into their lungs. From Yul Brynner's desperate warning to George Harrison's peaceful farewell, from Jack Cassidy's fatal spark to Anne Gillian's miraculous survival, each tale reminds us that mortality does not discriminate, not even against legends. Do you remember watching any of these stars in their prime? Did their stories touch something in you tonight? Leave your memories below, because that is how they live on. And if you believe these stories should never be forgotten, subscribe to Tragic Hollywood, where the brightest lights meet the darkest truths.